fierce battle across Sudan. The army and the powerful paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, have been in conflict for more than a year. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who leads the army, and General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hamati, in charge of the RSF, were once allies. But they fell out over how and when to integrate the RSF into the army. It led to armed conflict in the capital, Khartoum, which has spread to several provinces. After more than a year of fighting, Sudan is divided, and the RSF controls many areas in the west and south, and the Sudanese army controls most of the east and north. Recently, the fighting has intensified in northern Darfur, in the state capital Al-Fasher, West Kordofan state, and now in Sennar state.
Al-Fasher is just the last of the state's capitals in Darfur that is not under Rapid Support Forces' hands. Once it falls, or if it falls into Rapid Support Forces' hands, essentially the RSF would try to claim an independent government there, similar to how Haftar has done in Libya.
Fighting has created the world's largest internal displacement crisis. More than 9 million people have been forced to flee their homes, many several times. The UN says nearly 26 million people, that's half of Sudan's population, face severe food shortages, and 755,000 are on the brink of starvation. Both the Army and RSF have been accused of war crimes. The International Criminal Court has opened an investigation. Calls for dialogue and a humanitarian ceasefire have come to nothing, and with the warring factions seemingly unwilling to compromise, the fighting and the suffering of Sudan's people goes on. Alex Gatopoulos, Al Jazeera.
We can now speak to Alan Boswell, who's a Horn of Africa project director for the International Crisis Group. He's joining us from Cairo. Alan Boswell, thanks for your time with us on Al Jazeera. If you could just sort of give us your readings as to where things stand militarily right now on the ground in Sudan.
Sure. Well, the RSF does continue to take some ground. They have some new momentum in various parts of the country. But I think the better way of phrasing this is that the Sudanese state continues to collapse. The army continues to be unable, essentially, to launch major counteroffensives, and it also continues to struggle to hold ground. Meanwhile, everywhere that the RSF basically takes over, they do not govern. We see the Sudanese state recede, and we see ongoing fragmentation and collapse of the Sudanese state the longer this war goes on, and we see more and more Sudanese infrastructure also be destroyed.
So would you say then, with these gains by the RSF recently, that we're entering a new phase of the conflict?
Well, the RSF has held the military momentum for most of this war. For most of the first year of the war, they were the only ones really making any gains. There was a brief moment earlier this year where the Sudanese army did manage to make some gains with counteroffensives, but those gains were limited, and they've struggled to really maintain that. Whereas the RSF is a force built for rapid movement, just like their name suggests. They're able to move with great speed and do kind of lightning strikes. So they're much able to sort of probe the defenses. The army has been unable to really to hold ground and prevent some of these flanking maneuvers. So the time is really against them if they're unable to mount a counteroffensive and start to retake some of this territory.
So what does the collapse of the state, as you described it, and the lack of governance in areas mean for the people there? What impact is it having on them, for those who still remain?
Well, the Sudanese are starving to death. Basically, everywhere this war has reached, we are seeing mass starvation, hundreds of thousands on the brink of famine. Some say that they should already be declared in famine. This is for numerous reasons related to the conflict. Millions have been displaced, but also both sides are blocking food aid. Both sides are besieging populations. And since control is crisscrossed, that means they can effectively stop not only aid, but also make trade very expensive or difficult into areas. So we're seeing huge humanitarian crises wherever this war is reached, and the war keeps spreading the longer it goes on.
Are we anywhere closer today to getting the warring party leaders to talk about a ceasefire and some sort of sustainable end to the fighting?
Well, the Sudanese army, which is the one that has been losing ground over the past few weeks, especially, has still been publicly refusing to come back to peace talks. You do have renewed momentum from some corners to try to bring them back to talks. What's really been missing is not only coordinated action. There are a variety of different countries who've tried to bring them together, but none have really done so at high levels. And many of them are not willing to coordinate with each other. And we've also just not seen a high-level focus from world leaders, such as we've seen on Ukraine or Gaza or anything even approaching that level of concern or interest. And it's allowed these two warring parties to continue to fight and face little pressure to end the war despite the huge consequences. And maybe as Sudanese start to starve to death, we'll start to see a bit more focus. But it is possible to bring these two to talks and end this war if there was more focus on it.
Thank you so much, Alan Boswell. We do appreciate you speaking to us from Cairo.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.